Wait! Stop! The cry tore through the low rumble of engines in the underground garage. It was a child's voice, sharper than any gunshot. Luca Moretti's heart lurched. Luca, a tall man of 37 with jet black hair streaked with silver at the temples and a three-piece suit that cost more than most people's cars, was far more accustomed to inspiring terror than feeling it. But right now, his pulse was racing. One Italian leather shoe hovered mid-step as he spun toward the sound. The air reeked of gasoline and concrete dust beneath the cold, fluorescent lights of Moretti Tower's private garage. But suddenly everything smelled like danger. His bodyguards froze, hands twitching near holstered weapons. 5 black SUVs idled in formation, ready to escort the most feared Mafia boss in Chicago to his morning meeting. Everything had been routine until now. Luca Moretti had survived for over 15 years by keeping his life predictable and secure. The man they called the Ghost ran his empire with meticulous precision, because in his world, surprises usually meant death. A little girl, no older than 7, stood at the bottom of the ramp leading down from the street. She was barefoot, gasping for breath, her dark hair tumbling loose from a messy ponytail. A tear in her mud-stained dress flapped as she trembled. Fear shimmered in her wide brown eyes. But there was determination, too. She had burst into a lion's den armed with nothing but a scream. Marco Benedetti, Luca's right hand for over 20 years, recovered first. He stepped forward, raising his pistol at the intruder. "Halt!" he barked, voice echoing off concrete walls. The other guards fanned out. 12 trained guns now aimed at this single small girl. Their fingers hovered on triggers because in this world, hesitation meant death. Luca raised his hand sharply. "Don't shoot," he commanded. His voice was calm but carried an edge that sliced through the tension like a blade. He stared at the girl blocking the path to his car. For a split second, he wondered if this was some kind of trick, a diversion. His steel gray eyes swept the shadows, searching for any sign of ambush. Nothing. Just this trembling child and the thundering echo of his own heartbeat. "Please," the girl gasped, her small chest heaving. "Don't start the car." "You can't. It's not safe." Her plea hung in the frigid air. Marco narrowed his eyes down the gun sights and growled, asking who sent her, his voice low and steady. To him, anything unexpected was a threat, especially something unexpected in a secure garage that should have been impossible to breach. Luca stepped forward slowly, raising a hand to lower Marco's weapon. He noticed how the girl flinched at the movement but held her ground. The sheer courage it must have taken to run in here alone. Either she was telling the truth, or this was a performance worthy of an Oscar. "It's all right, little one," Luca said softly, his tone measured, almost gentle, a stark contrast to the deadly men surrounding them. "Tell me why. Why shouldn't we start the cars?" The girl swallowed hard. For a moment her resolve wavered, as if only now realizing a dozen guns were trained on her tiny frame, but she clenched her small fists. She forced the words out in a rush. "There's something under your car, mister. Something bad. I heard it ticking." A chill ran through Luca's veins at that word. Ticking. Time seemed to slow. Luca's gaze snapped from the girl to his lead SUV, his sleek black Escalade. Underneath it, Marco was already moving. He dropped into a crouch and duck-walked forward, pistol still in one hand. With the other, he pulled a flashlight from his belt and aimed the beam beneath the chassis. The concrete floor gleamed, slick from the morning rain tracked in by tires. Marco's light danced in the shadows. Luca held his breath. Behind him, another guard cursed softly in Italian. Then Marco froze. The flashlight beam landed on a metallic shape affixed to the undercarriage, right below where Luca would be sitting. A shape with wires and a small blinking red light. "Holy Mother of God," Marco rasped, his voice suddenly dry. Luca needed no further confirmation. His blood turned to ice, but his mind snapped into razor-sharp focus. A bomb. There was a bomb under his car. If you want to know who this mysterious girl is and why she risked her life to save a Mafia boss, hit that like button now. Share this story with someone who loves thrilling tales, and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Little did Luca know, this barefoot angel would not only save his life, but shatter everything he thought he knew about his own past. "Everyone fall back!" Luca roared, his voice rolling through the basement like thunder. He lunged toward the little girl the instant those words left Marco's mouth. The bodyguards reacted on instincts honed through thousands of life and death drills. They fanned out, shouting into radios, sprinting for the emergency exits in the evacuation formation they'd practiced over and over. Tires screamed as 2 SUVs behind them shot forward, trying to escape the blast radius. Sirens began to wail, red lights flashing wildly along the walls. But Luca didn't run for an exit. He ran for the child. Emma's small feet seemed nailed to the concrete, her body shaking harder than before. Her brown eyes were wide with terror at the chaos exploding around her. She'd found the courage to run in and warn them, but now fear had swallowed that courage whole. Luca didn't slow. He bent down, wrapped his arms around her, and lifted Emma as if she weighed no more than a feather. "Hold on to me," he said, his voice urgent yet carrying an uncanny calm. Emma's tiny fingers clutched the collar of his suit jacket. He felt her heart pounding like a frightened bird against his chest. Or was that his own? He couldn't tell anymore. Marco ran alongside him, shouting into his radio, ordering a full lockdown of the area. They needed to reach the concrete pillar at the far end of the basement. The minimum safe distance, 30 meters, 20 meters, 15 meters. Luca ran faster than he ever had in his life, his expensive suit flapping behind him, leather shoes skidding on the wet concrete. 10 meters. And then the world exploded. The sound came first, a deafening blast that tore through the air as if the sky itself were collapsing. Then the shockwave hit, an invisible wall of fire and pressure slamming into Luca's back with the force of a freight train. He felt his feet leave the ground. In that instant, the instinct of a father he hadn't even known was surged through him. Luca twisted in midair, curling around the small body in his arms, using his back and shoulders to shield Emma from the storm of fire chasing them. They crashed onto the concrete with a brutal impact. A sharp pain tore through Luca's right shoulder as shrapnel bit into flesh. His back felt as if thousands of needles were driving through the fabric of his suit, but he didn't let go. He held her tight, cocooning Emma in his arms while hell rained down around them. Glass shattered like rain. Hot metal screamed through the air. The stench of burning fuel, melting rubber, and something far worse Luca didn't want to name flooded his senses. For seconds that stretched into eternity, he heard nothing but the high-pitched ringing in his ears and the frantic pounding of his own heart. Then, slowly, it began to fade. Smoke and dust rolled over them like a poisonous fog. Groans and screams echoed somewhere within the haze. Flames still burned. The crackle of red-hot metal reverberating through the basement now turned into an inferno. Luca slowly loosened his grip, his body screaming with pain everywhere it could hurt. He looked down at the child curled beneath his chest. Emma whimpered softly, eyes squeezed shut, but her chest was still rising and falling. Alive. She was alive. A massive wave of relief surged through Luca, so powerful it nearly stole his breath. He gently set her down, checking for injuries. A few scrapes, grime, nothing serious. A miracle. Marco was coughing a few meters away, one side of his face smeared with dust and blood, but he was on his feet, gun still in hand. The sight behind them made Luca's breath catch. His $400,000 Escalade was nothing but a twisted, blazing wreck. If they'd been inside, if he'd even opened the door, there would have been nothing left to identify. Luca sat up, hurting but alive, and looked down at the child who'd saved his life. She saved my life. The thought rang in his head like a bell. This barefoot, frail, trembling child had risked everything to run into the lair of killers to warn a complete stranger. Why? Luca gently lifted her, draping his torn suit jacket over Emma's shaking shoulders. She opened her eyes, coughing from the smoke, but she was conscious. And in the moment those warm brown eyes met his, something inside Luca's chest suddenly tightened. Those eyes. Luca couldn't tear his gaze away from the brown eyes looking up at him. There was something in that look that nailed him in place, even as smoke and fire continued to roll around them and the chaotic shouts of the guards echoed through the basement. Warm brown eyes flecked with pale gold, glinting like honey in sunlight. He'd looked into eyes like these before, years ago, every night, every morning when he woke up, in moments when he believed he might become an ordinary man. Luca blinked, trying to shake the madness creeping into his mind. Smoke and shock could make people see things that weren't real. But when he studied the small face smeared with dust and tears more closely, his heart nearly stopped. The oval shape of the face with its stubborn pointed chin, the curve of her lips as she pressed them together to hold back sobs, the slight furrow of her brows in confusion, and the jet-black hair, as black as his own. The world around Luca suddenly blurred. Sounds dulled, as if someone had turned the volume down. Fire still burned. Marco was still shouting into his radio. Fire engines were still wailing somewhere in the distance, but it all dissolved into meaningless white noise. There was only this child, only this face, a face carrying features he saw every day in the mirror, blended with those of the only woman he'd ever loved. Is she all right? Marco appeared beside him, his voice raw from smoke, dragging Luca back toward reality. But Luca didn't answer. He couldn't. He could only stare at the girl as if trying to solve a riddle whose answer would change everything. "What's your name?" Luca asked, his voice hoarse and trembling in a way he didn't even recognize. The most powerful mafia boss on the city, the man who made the entire underworld tremble, was now shaking before a 7-year-old girl. "Emma," she replied, her voice barely more than a breath, still frightened but trying to be brave. "My name is Emma." Luca swallowed hard. A part of him was screaming to stop. Don't ask another question. Don't open this Pandora's box. But he couldn't stop. He needed to know. He had to know. "Emma what?" he pressed, each word dragged from his throat. "What's your last name?" She looked at him, her brown eyes still glassy but less afraid now. Maybe she sensed this terrifying man wouldn't hurt her. Or maybe she was simply too exhausted to be afraid anymore. "Santos," she said, her clear voice cutting through the smoke and noise. Emma Santos. The world collapsed. Not metaphorically. For Luca, in that instant, everything truly fell apart. Santos. That name. The name he'd tried to bury for 7 years. The name of the only woman who'd ever touched his frozen heart, then been pushed out of his life by his own hand. Aria Santos. "That's impossible," Luca whispered, his voice shattering like glass under a hammer. "Your mother. What's your mother's name?" Emma tilted her head, that painfully familiar tilt, exactly the way Aria used to tilt her head whenever she was puzzled. "My mom's name is Aria," she said. "Aria Santos. She works at a restaurant 3 blocks from here. She always talks about this building. She told me never to come near it." The blood in Luca's veins seemed to freeze. His knees weakened, and he nearly collapsed onto the cold concrete floor. 7 years. 7 years ago, he'd driven Aria away to protect her from his enemies. 7 years ago, she'd cried, begged him to let her stay, and he'd turned his back and walked away as if his heart wasn't breaking into a million pieces. 7 years. And in all that time, he hadn't known. He hadn't known Aria was pregnant. He hadn't known he had a daughter. Luca looked down at the girl sitting before him, her black hair tangled, her brown eyes shining, her face a perfect blend of him and Aria, and with a certainty that crushed bone and soul alike, he understood this was his child, his daughter. Marco stood beside him, his face draining of color as the truth hit him at the same moment it hit his boss. The 2 men locked eyes in a silence heavier than any words that could have been spoken. Marco opened his mouth, then hesitated. In more than 20 years at Luca's side, he'd never seen his boss like this. The cold face that never revealed emotion now looked as if it were cracking apart piece by piece. The steel-gray eyes that were always sharp now trembled with something Marco could only call pure pain. "Boss," Marco swallowed. "I need to tell you something." His voice dropped, low enough that only the 2 of them could hear, separate from Emma sitting a few steps away. Luca didn't answer. He only looked at Marco with the eyes of a man standing on the edge of collapse. "I knew about her," Marco confessed, each word dragged from his throat as if by iron tongs. "About Aria, and about the child." Silence stretched between them, heavy as lead. Around them, firefighters were extinguishing the flames consuming the Escalade. Medics ran back and forth with stretchers. But it all felt as if it were happening in another world. "You knew?" Luca finally spoke, his voice so cold the air itself seemed to freeze. "You knew and you didn't tell me?" Marco lowered his head, unable to meet his boss's gaze. 7 years ago, after you sent her away, I had people watch her, to make sure she was safe. That was your order, remember? Protect her from a distance. Don't let anyone know." Luca remembered. He remembered perfectly. It was the only thing he could do for Aria after pushing her out of his life. Protect her from the shadows. Love her in silence. But he'd never imagined there would be a child. 3 months after you sent her away, my people reported she was pregnant, Marco continued, guilt weighing down his voice. I didn't know what to do, boss. To keep it a secret from the rest of the family, I let Victor manage the private security team watching her. He provided the weekly reports. I thought she was struggling but safe. I didn't realize until now that he was filtering the truth from me. If I had known the extent of her suffering, I would have burned the world to get her back to you, and your enemies would have gained another target. Luca ground his teeth, his fists clenched until his knuckles went white. Rage boiled through his veins, but he didn't know where to direct it. At Marco for hiding the truth? At himself for pushing Aria away in the first place? Or at this brutal world, where loving someone could become their death sentence? All this time, Luca whispered, his voice breaking. For more than half a decade, I had a daughter and didn't know. The years of separation she spent raising that child alone. So much lost time. He turned back to Emma. She sat on the concrete floor, wrapped in his torn suit jacket, dirty bare feet drawn close, eyes fixed on the dying flames with a weariness far beyond a 7-year-old child. His daughter. His blood. 7 years he'd missed. The first laugh. The first steps. The first time she said Dad. A sound he'd never hear. All of those moments were gone, and he hadn't been there. Luca felt something wet slide down his cheek. He lifted a hand to touch it and froze when he realized it was a tear. He hadn't cried since his mother died 20 years ago. He'd believed the ability to cry had died with the last scraps of his humanity. But now, standing amid the wreckage of a failed assassination, staring at the daughter he hadn't known existed, Luca Moretti finally broke. "Why didn't she tell me?" he asked, his voice choked. "Why didn't Arya come find me?" Marco exhaled slowly. "She thought you hated her, boss. You sent her away without explaining. She believed you wanted nothing more to do with her. And she was too proud to beg." Luca closed his eyes, pain spearing through his chest like 1,000 blades. He'd tried to protect Arya by pushing her away. Instead, he'd pushed her into 7 years of hell alone. And his daughter, his poor little girl, had grown up without a father. "How did she live?" Luca asked, his voice barely a whisper. "These 7 years. How did Arya live?" Marco's eyes darkened. What he was about to say would be another blow to his boss's chest, but Luca needed to know. He deserved to know the brutal truth of what the woman he loved had endured. Luca stopped Marco with a raised hand. Before hearing about Arya, he needed to know what had happened that morning. He needed to hear it from the lips of the daughter he'd only just learned existed. He walked toward Emma, trying to soften the rigid set of his face, unsure whether he was succeeding. He lowered himself beside her, indifferent to the cold, filthy concrete, indifferent to the suit worth tens of thousands that was now nothing but trash. Emma looked up, brown eyes wide, and Luca felt his heart tighten again. "Can you tell me what happened?" he asked gently, his voice softer than he knew it could be. "What did you see this morning?" Emma pressed her lips together, small fingers worrying the edge of the suit jacket wrapped around her shoulders. She glanced down at her dirty bare feet, tiny toes curling from the cold. "This morning I walked to school," she began, her voice small but clear. "I always walk alone because my mom goes to work before sunrise. She works at the restaurant over there. The morning shift starts at 5. Something lodged in Luca's throat. 7 years old. His daughter was 7 and walking to school alone every morning, while her mother struggled to make a living. And he had been sleeping in his $1 million penthouse, unaware that his own blood was living in hardship just a few blocks away. "I went through the alley next to this big building," Emma continued, her gaze drifting as she remembered. "My mom always talks about this place. She says it's dangerous and I shouldn't go near it. But cutting through the alley is faster, and I was afraid of being late because the teacher would punish me." Luca stayed silent, not daring to interrupt. Beside him, Marco stood frozen, listening. "This morning I heard people talking in the alley," Emma said, her voice trembling slightly as the memory returned. 2 men. They were wearing black and bending under a car. A shiny black car like yours. She pointed toward the smoking wreckage. I hid behind a trash bin and watched. I saw them attach a small box under the car. There was a red light blinking, and I heard ticking. Luca's hands clenched. The bombers had worked right in front of a 7-year-old child without realizing it. One of them said something about the boss blowing up. Emma went on, her voice growing quieter. The other one laughed and said, "Today the ghost would become a real ghost." I didn't really understand, but I knew they were doing something bad. I knew they wanted to kill someone. The ghost, his name in the underworld. The assassins had spoken it in front of his daughter without knowing. "What did you do then?" Luca asked, his voice shaking despite his effort to control it. Emma looked up at him, those warm brown eyes now holding a resolve far beyond her years. "I was scared," she admitted. "I wanted to run. I wanted to pretend I didn't see anything and go straight to school. But then I thought about my mom." Tears spilled down Emma's cheeks, carving clean lines through the dust on her face. "My mom always teaches me that good people never turn away when someone's in danger. She says if you can help someone and you don't, you're just as bad as the person doing the bad thing." I didn't want to disappoint her. Luca felt his chest tighten as if crushed by an invisible hand. Arya, even living in hardship, she'd taught their daughter to be good. She'd kept the kindness he'd loved 7 years ago. "I ran in here," Emma continued, her voice breaking into sobs. "I didn't know who was inside. I didn't know there would be so many guns. I just knew I had to warn someone before it was too late. I was so scared, but I thought if my mom were here, she would have done the same." Luca couldn't hold back anymore. He reached out, for the first time in his life deliberately touching the daughter he hadn't known existed 10 minutes earlier. He gently stroked Emma's tangled black hair, and she didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned into his hand like a kitten desperate for warmth. "You're very brave," Luca whispered, his voice thick. "You're the bravest child I've ever met. And your mother raised you well." Emma looked up at him, tears still falling but her small lips trying to smile. "Do you know my mom?" she asked, a child's curiosity shining through the tears. "She looks at a picture of a man and cries sometimes. She doesn't know I see it, but I do. Are you the man in that picture?" Emma's question struck Luca like a blade straight through the heart. He couldn't answer. He didn't know how to answer. How could he explain to a 7-year-old child that he was the man who had abandoned her mother? How could he say that every tear Arya cried in the dark was because of him? Marco stepped closer and placed a hand on Luca's shoulder, a silent reminder. His boss needed the truth before facing Arya. He needed to know what that woman had endured. "Emma, would you like something to eat?" Marco asked the girl in the gentlest voice a man who had killed more than 50 people could manage. "I'll have someone bring you food. Then this gentleman and I will talk for a moment. All right." Emma nodded, her eyes already drooping with exhaustion. She'd been through too much for one morning, for a 7-year-old child. Marco signaled a guard to take Emma to a temporary restroom inside the building, somewhere safer and warmer than this ruined basement. When she disappeared behind the door, Marco turned back to face his boss. His expression darkened, heavy with secrets carried for 7 years. "You want to know how Arya lived?" Marco began, his voice low and weighted. "Then this is what I know. What my people reported over the past 7 years." Luca stood motionless, bracing himself for what was coming. But no preparation could soften the words that followed. "After you sent her away, Arya went back to her father's house in the suburbs of Boston," Marco said, each word like a stone thrown into Luca's face. Old man Santos never accepted his daughter being involved with someone from the underworld. When Arya showed up at his door with a belly just beginning to show and no husband, he lost his mind. Luca clenched his jaw. He knew Arya's father, a rigid, conservative man who valued family honor above all else. He'd violently opposed Arya dating Luca, calling his own daughter trash for loving a criminal. He demanded that Arya get an abortion. Marco continued, his voice darkening. Said he wouldn't allow the blood of a Mafia man to run through the Santos family. He threatened to disown her if she kept the baby. And Arya chose to keep the child, Luca whispered. Not a question, but a statement. He knew she would. She was stubborn, always willing to stand against the world for what she believed was right. It was one of the reasons he loved her. She chose the baby. Marco nodded. And he kept his word. He threw her out that very night, in the middle of winter. Arya had no money, nowhere to go, no one to turn to. She slept at a train station for the first 3 nights, before finding a cheap boarding house that would take her in without a deposit. Luca felt his knees threaten to give way. His Arya, the woman he loved, sleeping in a train station like a homeless person while carrying his child. And where had he been? In his warm penthouse, drinking expensive liquor, convincing himself he'd done the right thing by pushing her away. She found work as a waitress at a small diner, Marco went on, giving Luca no time to breathe. Working 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, until her belly grew too large for her to stand and serve. The owner fired her in her 8th month. Said customers didn't want an unmarried pregnant woman serving their food. Luca's fists clenched until his nails bit into flesh. Rage burned through him, but there was no one to unleash it on. The man he wanted to kill most was himself 7 years ago. She gave birth to Emma at Street. Mary's Charity Hospital, Marco said, his voice sinking lower. Alone. No one by her side. No family, no friends, no one at all. Just unfamiliar nurses and 4 cold white walls. Luca closed his eyes, but the images still flooded in. Arya, his proud, strong Arya, alone on a hospital bed, writhing in labor with no hand to hold. And worse, Marco said, each word like a hammer blow to Luca's chest. There were complications. Arya suffered severe postpartum hemorrhaging. She nearly died, boss. My people reported she lost more than 2 liters of blood. Doctors had to transfuse her immediately, and she was in a coma for 3 days afterward. 3 days after Emma was born, with no mother to hold her because her mother was fighting for her life. Luca turned and slammed his fist into the concrete wall. Once, twice, 3 times, until his knuckles bled and physical pain could dull the agony tearing his heart apart. Why didn't you tell me? He roared, his voice the howl of a wounded beast. Why did you let her suffer alone? Marco didn't look away from his boss's fury. Because you ordered no interference, he said evenly. Because you said if she knew you were still watching, she'd never be able to start a new life. And because I thought she'd be all right after giving birth. I was wrong. We were all wrong. Luca stood there, blood dripping from his knuckles onto the concrete floor, mixing with dust and ash from the explosion. But the pain in his hands was nothing compared to the agony crushing his chest. And Marco wasn't finished. Luca could see it in the eyes of his right hand. "What else?" Luca asked, his voice raw as if someone had poured sand down his throat. "Say it all. I need to know everything." Marco drew a deep breath, his face heavy as though he too was carrying the weight of these memories. "After she recovered, Arya had to find a way to raise the child," he continued, his voice low and deliberate. "She worked 3 jobs at the same time. In the mornings from 5 to 9, she cleaned offices for an industrial cleaning company. From 10 in the morning until 6 in the evening, she waited tables at a restaurant on the south side. And from 7 at night until 11, she babysat for families in the apartment complex." Luca tried to picture Arya, the woman with the radiant smile and sparkling eyes he'd loved, waking at 4 every morning and working until nearly midnight. 18 hours. 18 hours of labor every single day just to keep herself and her daughter alive. And where was Emma then? He asked, even though he knew the answer would only hurt more. Marco sighed. During the day, she left Emma at a free daycare run by a church. At night, she took her along when she babysat. Emma grew up in strangers' apartments, sleeping on couches that weren't hers, carried home in her mother's arms long after midnight. That child didn't have a childhood, boss. She only had survival. Luca clenched his jaw until it ached. He was one of the richest men in the region. He had mansions, luxury cars, his own private army, and his daughter grew up without a childhood just a few blocks away from him. But it didn't end there, Marco said, his voice darkening further. When Emma was 3, the worst thing happened. Luca looked at Marco, and what he saw in his eyes made his blood boil. There was something even more horrific than what he'd already heard. Something Marco was struggling to say. The landlord where Arya rented her apartment was a drunk named Henderson, Marco said slowly. Each word dragged from his mouth. He desired Arya for a long time. One night, when Arya came home late and Emma was fast asleep, he used a spare key to let himself in. "No," Luca whispered, his voice the groan of a dying animal. "No, don't tell me that." Marco nodded, his face hard as stone. "He raped her, boss. Right there in the room where her daughter was sleeping just a few meters away." Arya didn't dare scream because she was afraid Emma would wake up and see. She bit her lip until it bled to keep from making a sound. The world in front of Luca turned red. Rage erupted inside him like a volcano. He wanted to find Henderson and tear him apart with his bare hands. He wanted to make him suffer 1,000,000 times more than Arya ever had. "That bastard!" Luca roared, his voice like thunder. "Where is he now?" "Dead," Marco replied calmly. "A car accident 6 months later. His brakes failed while he was driving downhill. No survivors." Their eyes met. Luca understood instantly. It wasn't an accident. Marco had taken care of him without asking permission. "That's the only thing I ever did without reporting it," Marco said quietly. "I don't regret it." Luca nodded. It was the only time he didn't blame Marco for acting on his own. After that night, Arya ran immediately. Marco continued. She didn't dare stay another second in that apartment. She packed her things in less than 10 minutes and disappeared into the night with Emma. The problem was she had no money to rent a new place. She had no family to turn to. "And where did she live?" Luca asked, even though he knew the answer would be another blow to the chest. "In her car," Marco said. She bought a beat-up old car with the last few $100s she had and lived in it with Emma. For 2 months. In the middle of a Chicago winter, Luca felt his legs weaken. A Chicago winter. Temperatures dropping below -10 degrees. Wind cutting through flesh. And Arya, the woman he loved, had held their 3-year-old daughter in a broken-down car, sleeping through that lethal cold. Emma developed severe pneumonia, Marco went on, each word like a blade. She had to be rushed to the hospital. Doctors said another day and she wouldn't have survived. Arya knelt at the hospital gates, begging them to save her child because she had no money, no insurance. They admitted Emma on humanitarian grounds, but afterward Arya was left with a crushing medical debt. Luca dropped to his knees. He, the most powerful Mafia boss in the Midwest, knelt on the shattered basement floor not because an enemy had defeated him, but because the weight of his guilt was crushing his soul. His daughter had almost died. His daughter had almost died from cold and hunger while he lived in luxury. Since that fateful day, he whispered, his voice completely broken. Throughout those long years, I let her endure this hell. To think that for all this time, I didn't even know my daughter existed. An entire lifetime missed. And Marco still had one final part of the story left to tell. Luca remained on his knees on the cold concrete floor, his legs no longer strong enough to lift him. But Marco wasn't finished. There was the present, too. What was happening to Arya right now? Not distant memories, but a brutal, ongoing reality. After Emma recovered, Arya found an apartment on the south side. Marco continued, his voice sinking as if speaking these words hurt him as well. The worst area of Chicago. Boss. Gangs. Drugs. Street violence. But it was the only place she could afford. A studio apartment less than 30 square meters. Cracked walls. Leaking pipes. Freezing in winter because the heating didn't work. Suffocating in summer with no air conditioning. That's where your daughter grew up. That's where Emma learned to walk. Learned to talk. Learned to read. In a crumbling apartment in the slums, while her father lived in a $20 million penthouse just a few kilometers away. Arya still works 2 jobs, Marco said. Cleaning offices in the morning, waiting tables in the afternoon and evening. She sends Emma to a free public school nearby, but the neighborhood isn't safe. The child walks to school alone every day, because her mother doesn't have time to take her. A 7-year-old crossing streets filled with crime and drugs by herself. Luca thought of Emma, the barefoot little girl with dirt on her legs and a torn dress, who had run into his basement to warn him about the bomb. She was used to danger. She had grown up surrounded by it. Because he hadn't been there to protect her. And there's more, Marco said, drawing in a deep breath, his face tense as if bracing for the final blow. 6 months ago, Arya was diagnosed with heart disease, mitral valve regurgitation. She needs urgent surgery. Without it, she could die at any time. Luca's already shattered heart felt completely crushed. Heart disease. Arya was sick. The woman he loved was facing death, and he hadn't known. Why didn't she have the surgery? Luca asked, even though he already knew the answer. Because she doesn't have the money, Marco replied. The surgery costs more than $80,000. Arya doesn't have health insurance. She tried applying for charity programs, but the waiting lists are years long. She's living on painkillers and hope, but doctors say her heart is getting weaker every day. Luca wanted to scream. He wanted to destroy everything around him. $80,000. That wasn't even 1/10 of the SUV that had just exploded. It wasn't worth the party he threw for business partners last week. And Arya was slowly dying because she didn't have that small amount. And the debt, Marco continued. Hospital bills from Emma's pneumonia, medication, overdue rent, loan sharks she borrowed from just to survive. Altogether, Arya owes around $30,000. Every week, someone comes knocking, demanding payment. Once they threatened to hurt Emma if she didn't pay. $30,000. Luca could make that in a few hours. He could write a check right now without thinking. But Arya was drowning in debt, being threatened, dying because she didn't have money that meant nothing to him. Did you try to help her? Luca asked, his voice shaking with barely restrained fury. In those 7 years, did you do anything? Marco lowered his head. I tried, he admitted. I pretended to be a friendly neighbor, sometimes brought them food, offered financial help. But Arya refused everything. She was too proud to accept charity from a stranger. She said she'd handle it herself, that she didn't need anyone. That was the Arya Luca knew. Proud to the point of stubbornness, independent to the point of self-destruction. She'd rather die than beg. She'd rather let her daughter suffer than lower herself to ask for help. And she would rather die than come back to Luca. Luca forced himself up, his legs still trembling but fueled now by rage. He stood tall, steel-gray eyes burning like red coals. Take me to her, he ordered, his voice no longer that of a man crushed by bad news. It was the voice of the most powerful mafia boss in the Midwest, the man the entire underworld feared. Now, I need to see Arya. I need to see my daughter's mother. Marco lifted his head, a spark of hope flashing in his eyes. This was the boss he knew. Not the man broken by pain, but the man who would move mountains to protect those he loved. What about the bombing? Marco asked. We need to investigate who's behind it. Luca looked toward the smoking wreckage that had nearly become his grave minutes earlier. The bomb can wait, he said coldly. Arya can't. She's waited 7 years. I won't make her wait another second. The black SUV came to a stop in front of a crumbling apartment building on the south side. Luca stepped out with Emma in his arms, and it felt as if someone were crushing his heart in their fist. The building looked as though it could collapse at any moment. Brick walls split by deep cracks, obscene graffiti sprayed across the surface, broken windows patched with scraps of cardboard, rusted fire stairs groaning ominously with every shift of weight. And this was where his daughter had grown up. This was where the woman he loved was slowly dying of heart disease. 3rd floor, Marco said quietly. Apartment 37. Luca climbed the stairs, every step heavy as if his legs were wrapped in lead. Emma was more alert now after eating and resting a little. but she clung to his neck as though afraid he might disappear. She didn't know who he was yet. She only knew he was the man who had shielded her from the explosion. Outside apartment 37, Luca stopped. His heart pounded in a way it never had during any life or death, negotiation or battle. 7 years. 7 years without seeing Arya. 7 years drowning her memory in alcohol and sleepless nights. Now she was just beyond a thin, fragile door. He knocked. Silence. Then footsteps. Then the sound of a lock turning. The door opened a crack, and Luca's world stopped spinning. Arya stood there, thinner than he remembered, paler than he remembered, but still beautiful in a way that made his chest ache. Her long black hair was hastily tied back, revealing deep shadows beneath her brown eyes, the same eyes he'd seen in his dreams for 7 years. Those eyes now widened in horror as they recognized who stood at her door. "Emma!" Arya cried, her voice breaking. "My baby, are you hurt?" She snatched Emma from Luca's arms and crushed her to her chest, as if someone might steal her away. Her hands trembled as she checked her daughter from head to toe, searching for injuries. Tears streamed down her face when she saw the scrapes and bruises on Emma's skin. "I'm fine, Mom," Emma said, her voice tired but strangely calm. "He saved me. There was a bomb, but he covered me. He's not bad, Mom." Arya lifted her head, and her eyes met Luca's. In that instant, Luca saw every emotion tear across her face like a storm. Shock, pain, relief, and finally, fury. A fury that erupted like a volcano, burning everything else away. "You," Arya hissed through clenched teeth, her voice cold as ice. "You dare show up here." "Arya, I need to talk to you," Luca began, but she cut him off. "Talk," Arya laughed, a bitter sound that sliced into Luca like a blade. "Back then, you threw me out like a dog. Since we parted, you never once looked for me, and now you want to talk." She turned and carried Emma inside. Luca stepped forward, but Arya spun back and blocked the doorway. "You're not coming in," she snapped, her eyes blazing with hatred. "This is my home. It's terrible. It's nothing compared to your dog kennel, but it's mine, and you don't get to step inside." "Arya, please listen to me," Luca said, his voice pleading in a way he'd never pleaded with anyone before. "I know what you think. I know you hate me, but please, give me a chance to explain." "Explain," Arya repeated, her voice heavy with 7 years of pain. "What do you want to explain? Explain why you threw me onto the street when I was pregnant with your child. Explain why you let me give birth alone and almost die from blood loss. Explain why your daughter grew up in poverty while you lived like a king." Emma stood between them, her eyes darting from her mother to the strange man and back again. She didn't understand what was happening, but she felt the suffocating tension in the air. "Mom," Emma said softly, "don't be mad. He saved me. I didn't send you away because I hated you," Luca said, his voice breaking. "I sent you away because someone wanted to kill you to get to me. I thought if you left, you'd be safe. I didn't know you were pregnant. I swear to you, I didn't know." "Lies." Arya stepped forward, her finger stabbing toward Luca's face. "You're Luca Moretti. You know everything. You control an empire. And you want me to believe that for 7 years you couldn't find out where I was or what I was doing. Do you want the truth?" Luca asked, his voice dropping. "I watched you for 7 years. I knew everything you went through, and I didn't intervene because I thought you'd be happier without me. I was wrong. I was devastatingly wrong. And I didn't come here today to ask for your forgiveness. I came because our daughter saved my life this morning, and I won't let either of you suffer another day." Arya stood there, her chest rising and falling, her eyes still burning but now holding something else. Confusion. And maybe, just maybe, a flicker of hope she was trying to extinguish. "I don't need your pity," she said, but her voice had softened. "I lived 7 years without you. I can keep living that way." "That's not pity," Luca replied, stepping closer. "That's responsibility. That's the love I never stopped having for you. And that's my right to be a father to my daughter." Arya opened her mouth to argue, but at that moment she clutched her chest, her face twisting in pain. She staggered, nearly falling, and Luca lunged forward on instinct, catching her. In that instant, as he held her in his arms, he felt her heartbeat racing, irregular and wrong. Heart disease. Marco hadn't exaggerated. Arya was truly dying. "Let go of me." Arya tried to push Luca away, but her body no longer had the strength. The pain in her chest spread as if someone were crushing her heart in their fist. She hated this weakness. She hated having to rely on the man who had destroyed her life. But her legs wouldn't obey, and she could only cling to his arm to keep from collapsing. Mom! Emma ran to her, her eyes filled with worry. Is your chest hurting again? Do you need to take your medicine? Luca looked down at his daughter, and the truth struck him like a slap. Emma knew. A 7-year-old child who was used to watching her mother suffer from heart pain, used to wondering whether her mother would survive another night. He gently helped Arya sit on the worn-out sofa nearby, the kind of sofa he wouldn't have sat on anywhere else. But this was all Arya had. This was everything she could give her daughter. You need to go to the hospital, Luca said, his voice thick with worry. Right now, I don't have the money, Arya replied bitterly. And I don't need you to remind me of that. I'll take care of it, Luca said immediately. I'll handle everything. The surgery, the medication, the debts, all of it. I don't need your help. Arya lifted her head, her eyes still proud despite her weakening body. I've taken care of myself for 7 years. I don't need anyone. And you almost died, Luca said flatly, not avoiding the truth. You're dying, Arya. Your heart is getting weaker every day, and if you die, what happens to our daughter? Have you thought about Emma? The question hit Arya like a bucket of ice water. She looked at her daughter, standing there with fear and worry in her eyes. Emma was the only reason she'd fought to survive each day, and if she died, Emma would be alone. I know you hate me, Luca continued, his voice softening. I know you have every reason to hate me, but please, let me explain once. Just once. After that, if you still want me gone, I'll go, but I'll still take care of you and Emma whether you accept it or not. Arya was silent, her breathing still heavy after the heart pain. She didn't want to listen. She didn't want to give Luca a chance to explain, but part of her, the part she'd tried to bury for 7 years, was aching to know the truth. 7 years ago, someone wanted you dead, Luca began, his voice low and aching. The Romano family. They found out I had a weakness, a woman I loved more than my own life. They planned to kidnap you to force my hand. I had 2 choices, keep you by my side and make you a target forever, or push you away so they'd believe you no longer mattered to me. Arya looked at him, her eyes trembling. She wanted not to believe him. She wanted to think this was just a cheap excuse. But something in Luca's voice, in the gray eyes looking at her with unhidden pain, made it impossible to deny. I chose to push you away, Luca continued, his voice breaking. I thought it was the only way to protect you. I didn't know you were pregnant. I swear to you, I didn't know. If I had known, I would have never left you alone. I would have found another way. I would have done anything. Why didn't you tell me? Arya asked, her voice shattering. Why didn't you explain? Why did you let me believe you hated me? Because you wouldn't have left, Luca answered. You're stubborn, Arya. You would have stayed and faced the danger with me, and that would have killed you. I'd rather have you hate me than have you dead. Tears streamed down Arya's face even though she didn't want to cry. She'd cried enough over this man. She'd sworn she would never cry for him again, but the tears kept falling, carrying 7 years of pain, loneliness, and misunderstanding. Emma stepped forward, her small hands taking her mother's hand and Luca's hand. She looked from one to the other, her clear brown eyes full of hope. Mom, don't cry anymore, she said softly. He's not bad. He saved me, and he's crying too. Luca raised a hand to his face and was stunned to feel tears on his cheeks. The second time today, after 20 years without shedding a single tear. My mom might not forgive you, Luca said to Emma, his voice hoarse. And I understand that. But I promise you, from now on, I'll protect you and your mom at all costs. I won't let either of you suffer anymore. Emma looked at him, then at her mother, then back at him. So are you my dad? The question hung in the air. Arya and Luca looked at each other, and in that moment there was no hatred, no pain, only 2 people facing a truth they'd both avoided for far too long. I am your dad, Luca said, his voice trembling, and I'm sorry I wasn't there for 7 years. Emma smiled, her first smile since the morning's chaos. Then she threw her arms around Luca, and he froze for a heartbeat before holding his daughter for the first time in his life. Arya watched, and her aching heart broke again. But this time, not from hatred, from something she didn't dare name. I'll go with you, she said, her voice barely a whisper. But only for Emma, not for you. Luca nodded, asking for nothing more. Only for Emma, he agreed. That's all I need. At the same time, on the other side of the city, inside an abandoned warehouse in the Southern Industrial District, another meeting was taking place. Victor Castellano stepped through a rusted steel door, his eyes sweeping the darkness like an old fox scenting danger. 15 years he'd played the role of Luca Moretti's loyal advisor. 15 years living in the shadow of a man younger, sharper, more respected. 15 years swallowing humiliation and waiting for his chance. Today, that chance had finally arrived. Mr. Castellano, a voice echoed from the shadows. I hear your plan failed. Nicholas Romano emerged beneath a dim yellow light, his face cold, a scar running from his temple down to his chin. 32 years old, the only son of Salvatore Romano, the sworn enemy of the Moretti family. He wore a black leather jacket and looked at Victor with an expression that mixed contempt and calculation. Victor didn't flinch. The bomb didn't kill Luca, he admitted, but it gave us something far more valuable than his life. Information. Nicholas crossed his arms, one brow lifting in suspicion. What information? Victor smiled, the smile of a snake about to strike. Luca Moretti has a daughter, 7 years old, and a woman he loves enough to burn the world for. I've been watching them for 7 years, waiting for the right moment to use this knowledge, and now is that moment. Nicholas's eyes lit up with cruel interest. A daughter. Luca Moretti, the man they call the Ghost, the man who never shows weakness, has a child, and he hid her for 7 years. Victor nodded. But this morning, the girl ran into his basement herself to warn him about the bomb. Foolish or brave, I don't know, but it exposed everything. Now Luca knows about her, and he'll do anything to protect her. Anything. Nicholas began pacing, his mind processing the information at lightning speed. His father, Salvatore Romano, had tried to kill Luca Moretti for 20 years without success. The Ghost was too careful, too unpredictable, too hard to reach. But now everything had changed. Now Luca had a weakness. What do you want in return? Nicholas asked bluntly. Victor didn't hesitate. 30% of the Moretti empire after Luca is dead. And a permanent advisor position with the Romano family, too expensive. Nicholas shook his head. 20%. Victor scoffed. I have what you need. I know all of Luca's plans, every security flaw, every person he trusts. Without me, you'll keep failing the way your father failed for 20 years. 30%, or I'll find another buyer. The two men stared at each other, the air thick with suffocating tension. Finally, Nicholas nodded. Fine, 30%. But you guarantee this plan succeeds. I won't accept a second failure. Victor opened the leather briefcase he'd brought. Inside were maps, photographs, and a small tracking device. Luca is taking the woman and the child to a safe house near Lake Michigan, he explained, pointing at the map. I'll visit as a concerned advisor checking on my boss. I'll plant this tracker inside the house. After that, you'll know the exact location and the security schedule. Nicholas nodded, a vicious smile spreading across his lips. When do we strike? Tomorrow night, Victor replied. Luca will lower his guard, thinking the safe house is secure. You go in, take the child and the woman, kill all the guards. When Luca gets the news, he'll come running like a rabid animal, and that's when you finish him. Nicholas extended his hand. Deal. Victor clasped it, laughing silently to himself. 15 years in the shadows. 15 years watching Luca be worshipped like a king while he remained a nameless servant. It was time for that to change. And if achieving it meant sacrificing an innocent child and her mother, that was a price he was willing to pay. Luca's father had saved Victor's life 30 years ago. He'd sworn lifelong loyalty to the Moretti family. But loyalty couldn't buy power, and power was the only thing that mattered in this world. Luca's safe house was a lakeside mansion on Lake Michigan, wrapped in the most advanced security money could buy. 12 guards on duty 24 hours a day, cameras watching every blind spot, and a hidden escape tunnel leading to a private dock behind the property. This was where Luca retreated whenever the underworld became too dangerous. But today, he wasn't running from enemies. He was trying to learn how to be a father. Emma sat on the large sofa in the living room, her small legs dangling above the floor as she looked around the vast space. It was the first time in her life she'd ever seen a house this big. The apartment she shared with her mother could fit inside this living room and still leave room to spare. Luca sat a short distance away, unsure whether to move closer or keep his distance. He'd negotiated with the most dangerous drug lords. He'd stared down gun barrels without blinking. But sitting near his 7-year-old daughter and trying to think of something to say left him completely helpless. "Are you hungry?" he asked, the most awkward question he could think of. Emma shook her head, then nodded, then shook it again. She didn't know how to answer this strange man who'd just said he was her father, someone she'd never met in her life. Aria was in the next room, being examined and given medication by Luca's private doctor. She'd reluctantly agreed to rest after Luca nearly begged her. That left Luca alone with Emma, and he had no idea what to do. "I'll have someone bring food up," Luca said as he stood, but Emma spoke suddenly, stopping him. Uncle, she called softly. Luca turned back, his heart tightening at the word. Uncle, not Dad. She still wasn't used to the idea that he was her father. What is it, sweetheart? He asked gently, trying to soften his voice as much as he could. Emma pressed her lips together, thinking carefully before she spoke. Earlier you said you're my dad, she began slowly. But I don't understand. If you're my dad, why have I never met you? Why did Mom never talk about you? Why does Mom cry when she looks at your picture? Each question struck Luca like an arrow to the heart. He stood there, the most powerful man in the state, being questioned by a 7-year-old child and not knowing how to answer. He couldn't lie to Emma. She deserved the truth. But the truth was complicated, painful, and hard to explain to a child. Luca slowly sat back down, this time closer to her. He looked into the clear brown eyes, waiting for an answer, and decided to tell the truth in a way she could understand. Dad did something very stupid, he began, his voice low and full of regret. A long time ago, bad people wanted to hurt your mom to make me do what they wanted. I was scared that if your mom stayed with me, she'd be in danger. So I told her to leave. I thought that would protect her, but I was wrong. Emma's eyes widened. So you didn't hate Mom? Never. Luca shook his head, his voice catching. I love your mom. I love her very much. And I didn't know she was carrying you when she left. If I'd known, I would have never let her go. I would have found another way. I swear to you. Emma was quiet for a long moment, her small mind trying to process it all. Then she asked a question that nearly stole Luca's breath. So do you love me now? The question was simple, but it held a lifetime of longing from a child who'd grown up without a father. Luca felt his eyes burn. He, a man who hadn't cried in 20 years, was struggling not to cry in front of his 7-year-old daughter. I love you, he said, his voice trembling. I've only known you for a few hours, but I love you more than anything in this world. You're my daughter, you're my blood, and I'll do anything to protect you and your mom. I promise. Emma studied him for a long moment, as if deciding whether she could believe him. Then her small lips began to tremble, and tears rolled down her cheeks. I've been waiting for you for a long time, she whispered, her voice breaking. Whenever I saw other kids being taken to school by their dads, I wished my dad would come too. Mom said my dad went very far away and couldn't come back. But I still waited. I waited every day. Luca couldn't bear it anymore. He pulled Emma into his arms, holding her tightly as if she might disappear. The small child sobbed against his chest, and Luca felt his own tears falling. He cried for the 7 lost years. He cried for birthdays he'd missed. He cried for nights Emma had waited for a father who never came. I'm sorry, he whispered into her black hair. I'm sorry I wasn't here. But from now on, I'm not going anywhere. I promise. Emma looked up at him, her face streaked with tears but forming a smile. A smile just like Arya's, just like the woman Luca loved. So can I call you Dad now? She asked softly. Not Uncle anymore. Luca smiled, his first real smile in years. A smile without calculation, without armor. You can call me whatever you want, he said. And Luca Moretti, the most feared Mafia boss in the city, felt for the first time in his life that he was truly a father. From the doorway of the next room, Arya stood silently watching. She'd woken to the sound of crying, and what she saw was melting the wall of ice she'd built around her heart for 7 long years. Night settled over Lake Michigan, silver moonlight reflecting across water black as ink. Emma slept soundly in the bedroom prepared just for her, her face peaceful for the first time after a long day of upheaval. Luca sat alone on the porch, a glass of whiskey untouched in his hand, steel-gray eyes fixed on the quiet lake, while his mind raged like a storm. Soft footsteps sounded behind him. He didn't need to turn around to know who it was. After 7 years, he still recognized Arya's steps, as if they were carved into his bones. Can't sleep? He asked quietly. Arya stepped onto the porch, wrapped in a thin sweater the staff had prepared. She looked exhausted, yet her eyes were still bright, still proud as they'd always been. She sat in the chair beside Luca, keeping a careful distance, as if moving any closer might cause the wall she'd built to collapse. I saw you talking to Emma, Arya said, her voice softer than it had been that afternoon, no longer sharp, carrying something like fatigue. She's very happy. She's been waiting for a father for 7 years. Luca turned to look at Arya, and in that moment he didn't see a woman furious with him, but a woman who'd carried the weight of raising a child alone for years. Those brown eyes held 7 years of exhaustion, 7 years of loneliness, 7 years of fighting the world without anyone at her side. I'm sorry, Luca said, his voice rough. I know an apology can't undo what you've been through, but I need you to know There wasn't a single day I didn't think of you. Not a single night I didn't wonder where you were, whether you were safe, whether you were happy." Arya was silent for a long while, her gaze drifting over the lake. "Do you know what hurt the most?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Not that you sent me away, not that I had to give birth alone, not the nights of hunger and cold, or the humiliations. What hurt the most was that I still loved you, no matter what you did, no matter how hard I tried to hate you. I couldn't stop loving you, and that made me hate myself." Luca set the glass down, his heart aching as if crushed by an unseen hand. He turned fully toward Arya, and in the pale moonlight he saw tears sliding down her cheeks. "Arya," he said her name, his voice trembling. "I never stopped loving you either. Every woman I met, I compared to you. Every night I dreamed of you. Every morning I woke up reminding myself I'd let you go for your safety, but now I know it was the biggest mistake of my life. I should have fought for you, kept you close, found a way to protect you without pushing you away. I was a coward. I was foolish. And you paid the price for my foolishness." Arya looked at him, and in that moment the wall between them seemed to crack. 7 years, she whispered. 7 years I asked myself why. Why you left me. Why you didn't look for me. Why you didn't want your own daughter. I answered myself with the worst possible answers. That you never loved me. That I was just a distraction. That you were disgusted by the idea of having a child with me. "I never thought that," Luca said, reaching out, hesitating for a second, before gently touching her cheek, brushing away a falling tear. "You're the only woman I've ever loved, the only one who ever made me want to be a better man. And Emma, our daughter, is the greatest gift life could have given me." Arya didn't pull away. For the first time in 7 years, she allowed him to touch her, and when her skin met his rough hand, she felt a warmth she'd longed for through years of loneliness. "I don't know if I can forgive you," she admitted. 7 years of pain can't be erased in one night." "I know," Luca nodded. "I'm not asking for forgiveness right away. I'm only asking for a chance to prove myself. I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you and Emma. Whether you take me back or not, I'll still be here. I won't ever leave again." Arya looked at him, her brown eyes glinting under the moonlight. Then she did something neither of them expected. She leaned forward and rested her head against his shoulder. "Just 1 second," she whispered. "Just 1 second to pretend the last 7 years never happened." Luca wrapped his arms around her, gently, as if she were something fragile. He felt her breath against his chest, her scent still familiar as ever. And in the quiet night by Lake Michigan, 2 broken people found each other once more. They didn't know darkness was watching. They didn't know this was the last peaceful night before the storm would come crashing down. The next morning, the sun had just begun to rise over the lake when a black car rolled through the gates of the safe house. Victor Castellano stepped out, his face wearing a perfectly rehearsed look of concern, honed through decades of living a double life. Luca greeted him at the door, completely unaware that a wolf in sheep's clothing was walking straight into the heart of his sanctuary. "Boss, I heard about the explosion and came as soon as I could," Victor said, his voice heavy with feigned worry. "Are you all right? I've had people looking into it, but we don't have any leads yet on who's behind it." Luca nodded and invited Victor inside, never noticing the way his advisor's eyes swept the room, memorizing the position of every door, every window, every blind spot the security cameras didn't quite reach. "I'm fine," Luca replied. "Thanks to someone who warned us in time." Victor pretended to look surprised. "Warned you? Who was it?" Before Luca could answer, Emma ran out from the adjoining room, her black hair still messy from sleep. She stopped short when she saw the unfamiliar man, instinctively moving closer to Luca. Victor looked at the child, and something flickered in his eyes before he quickly masked it. "Is this your daughter?" he asked, his tone calm while his mind calculated. Luca placed a protective hand on Emma's shoulder. "This is Emma, my daughter." Victor smiled at the girl, a smile perfected to hide his true nature. "Hello there. You look just like your father." Emma didn't smile back. She studied Victor with a cautious gaze, the kind of instinct children raised in hardship often develop far too early. There was something about this man that made her uncomfortable, though she couldn't put it into words. From the stairs, Arya came down after hearing voices. She froze when she saw Victor, a chill running down her spine. His eyes, though smiling, held no warmth at all. They were cold, like a snake's, calculating and waiting. "This is Arya," Luca said. "Arya, this is Victor Castellano, my advisor for the past 15 years. Victor inclined his head politely. "It's a pleasure to meet you. Luca speaks highly of you." Arya nodded in return but said nothing. She drew Emma closer to her side, a protective gesture she didn't even realize she was making. Something about this man was wrong. She couldn't explain it, but 7 years in the slums had taught her how to recognize danger. "I need to speak with the boss privately for a moment," Victor said, his gaze briefly flicking toward Arya and Emma in a way that made Arya's skin crawl. "About the investigation." Luca nodded and led Victor into the study. When the two men disappeared behind the door, Arya knelt down to Emma's level. "Did you feel anything strange about him?" she whispered. Emma nodded, her brown eyes serious. "He smiles, but his eyes don't smile. Mom, like Mr. Henderson a long time ago." Arya felt the blood in her veins turn to ice. Mr. Henderson, the landlord who had raped her. Emma still remembered his eyes, even though she'd only been 3 when it happened, and now she was saying Victor had the same look. Inside the study, Victor droned on about meaningless details of the investigation, while discreetly attaching a tracking device, no larger than a fingertip, beneath the desk. The device would transmit the exact location and every conversation in the room directly to Nicholas Romano. Tonight. Everything would end tonight. As Victor left the safe house, he took one last look around. 12 guards, a 3-layer security system, an escape tunnel at the rear. He had everything he needed. Luca trusted him. That was the ghost's deadliest mistake. Victor climbed into his car, pulled out his phone, and sent a brief message to Nicholas. "Tonight, 11. Bring at least 30 men. And prepare body bags." On the porch, Arya watched the car disappear, unease twisting in her chest. She needed to tell Luca about her instincts. But would he believe a woman he'd only just reunited with after 7 years? Or the advisor who'd stood by his side for 15? That night, 15 minutes before 11, Arya still couldn't sleep. She stood by the bedroom window, staring into the darkness that swallowed the surface of the lake. A sense of dread had been gnawing at her all day ever since Victor left. She'd tried to tell Luca about her suspicions, but he'd only smiled and reassured her that Victor was the most trustworthy man in his entire empire. 15 years without betrayal, he'd said. But Arya knew that sometimes the ones who wait the longest are the most dangerous of all. Emma was sleeping peacefully on the bed, her face serene like an angel's. Arya bent down and kissed her daughter's forehead, her heart tightening with love. No matter what happened, she'd protect her child at any cost. The first sound came from the gates. A sharp explosion tore through the night, followed by the crack of automatic gunfire. Arya jolted, survival instincts honed by 7 years in the slums, snapping instantly into place. She rushed to the bed and shook Emma awake. "Wake up, baby," she said urgently, forcing calm into her voice while her heart hammered wildly. "We have to go now." Emma opened her eyes, still groggy, but she understood immediately when the gunfire kept erupting outside. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. 7 years in a violent neighborhood had taught her how to stay quiet in danger. The bedroom door burst open, and Luca rushed in, gun in hand, his face taut as a drawn wire. "The tunnel out back," he said fast. "Now." Romano is attacking. At least 30 men. They ran into the hallway as gunfire echoed through the house. Through a window, Arya saw dark figures flooding the garden, muzzle flashes flaring like deadly fireflies. Luca's guards were fighting back, but they were outnumbered. 1, 2, 3 men went down right before her eyes. Marco appeared from the end of the hall, blood pouring from his shoulder, his gun still firing. "There's a traitor," he shouted over the gunfire. "They know exactly where the cameras are, where the guards are, everything. There's an insider." Luca clenched his teeth, his mind racing. Who could know all of that? Who could move through the safe house without suspicion? And then the answer hit him like a slap. "Victor." "No," he whispered, unwilling to believe it. "It can't be." But before he could process the pain of betrayal, a familiar face emerged from the darkness at the end of the hall. Victor Castellano stood there, gun in hand, but not aimed at the attackers. It was pointed straight at Arya and Emma. "I'm sorry, boss," Victor said, his voice cold, utterly without remorse. "But 15 years in your shadow is long enough. It's time I stepped into the light." Luca raised his gun, but Victor was faster. He grabbed Emma, yanked her against him, and pressed the gun to the child's temple. "Drop the gun, Luca," Victor ordered, "or your daughter dies right here." "No," Arya screamed, lunging for her child. But one of Victor's men appeared from nowhere, grabbing her and wrenching her arms behind her back. She fought wildly but couldn't break free. "Let my daughter go, you bastard. Let her go." Emma screamed, small hands struggling uselessly against Victor's grip. "Daddy," she cried, calling Luca that word for the first time in sheer terror. "Daddy, save me." The sound of it tore Luca's heart apart. He looked at his daughter with a gun to her head, at the woman he loved held tight by 2 men, and he knew he had no choice. Slowly, he lowered his weapon to the floor. Victor smiled, a vicious smile of triumph. 15 years I built your trust. 15 years I pretended loyalty. And you never suspected a thing. He looked at Arya with contempt. You know something? I've been watching this woman for 7 years. Every bit of misery she endured. I had a hand in it. The landlord who raped her. I arranged it. The time she got fired. I interfered. I kept her desperate so when the time came, I could use her as a card. And today, that card finally paid off. Arya felt the world collapse beneath her. 7 years of hell. 7 years she'd thought it was cruel fate. But no, there had been a hand behind it, pushing her deeper step by step. And that hand belonged to the man smiling at her now. Luca roared like a wounded beast and charged Victor despite everything, but 2 of Victor's men slammed into him from behind, smashing him down with a gunstock. He hit the floor, blood spilling from his head as the world blurred. The last thing he saw before losing consciousness was Emma reaching for him, her mouth forming a desperate daddy, and Arya, tears streaming down her face, her lips shaping silent words. Find us. Marco tried to rush in, but a bullet tore into his remaining shoulder, dropping him to the floor. Around them, the remaining guards were either down or restrained. The safe house, the most secure fortress Luca Moretti possessed, had fallen. Victor ordered his men to take Arya and Emma. Before leaving, he crouched beside Luca's unconscious body. Goodbye, boss, he said softly. When you wake up, come to Pier 23 if you want to see them one last time. Nicholas is very eager to meet you. Then he vanished into the night, taking with him the 2 most precious hostages Luca Moretti had ever known. Luca opened his eyes to pain, crashing through his skull like a hammer. The stench of blood and gunpowder filled his lungs. He was lying on the cold floor, surrounded by the ruins of the safe house that had once been an impregnable fortress. Harsh light cut through his eyelids, and it took him a few seconds to realize it was the flashing lamps of an ambulance outside. Then memory slammed into him like a tidal wave. Emma. Arya. Victor. He surged upright despite the dizziness clawing at him, but a hand forced him back down, and he recognized Marco beside him, his shoulder wrapped in white bandages, his eyes still sharp. Stay still, boss, Marco said hoarsely. You've got a head injury. The doctor says you need rest. Where are Arya and Emma? Luca demanded, his voice a beast's growl. Answer me. Where are they? Marco went silent for a single second, and that silence told Luca everything. No, Luca whispered, his throat tightening. No, no, no. They took them, Marco said quietly. Victor and the Romano men. 4 guards dead, 8 badly wounded. The safe house is burned. We couldn't stop them, boss. I'm sorry. Luca didn't hear the apology. He heard nothing but Emma's voice crying daddy inside his head, the desperate call of a 7-year-old child dragged away by her father's enemies, and Arya's eyes, filled with tears yet still strong, her lips forming the words, "Find us," as she vanished into the dark. He stood, shoving away Marco and the medic trying to restrain him. His head was still bleeding, his body screaming in pain, but no physical agony could compare to the fire burning inside him. His daughter was in enemy hands. The woman he loved was being held captive, and the traitor who had stood beside him for 15 years was laughing somewhere in the shadows. Call everyone in, Luca ordered, his voice so cold the air seemed to freeze. Everyone still loyal to me. Every man, every gun, every car. I want them here within 1 hour. Marco looked at his boss and understood something had changed. The Luca Moretti he knew had been a calculating, controlled Don who never let emotion rule him. The man standing there now was a father whose daughter had been stolen. A demon had been unleashed. Boss, you need rest, Marco tried. You're bleeding. You need treatment first. Luca turned, steel-gray eyes now blazing like red embers. Rest, he repeated, his voice like a blade sliding from its sheath. My daughter is in the hands of killers. The woman I love is imprisoned. And you tell me to rest. He stepped closer, and even his most loyal right hand took a step back from the fury radiating off him. I won't rest until they're safe, Luca roared. I won't eat. I won't sleep. I won't breathe until I'm holding my daughter again, and every bastard who touched my family pays the ultimate price. Now go call them in. Or do you want me to see you as an enemy too? Marco said nothing more. He nodded and disappeared into the darkness to carry out the order. Within 45 minutes, 60 men gathered at a secret staging site on the outskirts of Chicago. The most loyal warriors of the Moretti Empire, men who had followed Luca from the beginning, men willing to die at his word. They stood in rows inside an abandoned warehouse, dim yellow light washing over hardened faces and hands long accustomed to blood. Luca stepped before them, The white bandage around his head soaked red, yet he stood straight like a king before his army. "The Romano family has attacked us," he said, his voice echoing through the dead silence. "They killed our brothers, they burned our home, and they took my daughter and the woman I love." A murmur rippled through the crowd. No one had known Luca had a child. No one had known he had a weakness. But now they saw it, and they understood why the demon in their boss's eyes had awakened. "Tonight, we take war to Pier 23, Luca continued. "We bring our people home, and we kill anyone who stands in our way. No mercy. Let no one escape. Anyone who hides Romano dies with Romano." He drew his gun and raised it high. "This is war, and we will win." 60 voices roared back, metal clashing as weapons were checked. In the darkness of Chicago, the Ghost's army prepared for the bloodiest battle the city's underworld had ever known. The warehouse at Pier 23 was cold and dark, the air thick with the stench of salt water and rusted metal. Arya was bound to a metal chair in the center of the room, her hands shackled behind her back, the rope cinched so tight that her wrists had begun to bleed. She didn't care about her own pain. Her eyes were locked on Emma, her 7-year-old daughter, trapped inside an iron cage about 10 meters away. The child was curled into a corner of the cage, brown eyes wide with fear, but she wasn't crying. Emma had learned very early that tears never changed anything in her life. "Mom," Emma whispered, her voice trembling. "I'm scared." "I'm here," Arya replied, forcing her voice to stay steady while her heart was breaking apart. "I won't let anyone hurt you. Daddy will come. Daddy will find us." Laughter echoed from the shadows, and Nicholas Romano stepped into the yellowed light. His face was cold, the long scar running from his temple to his chin making him look like a demon dragged out of hell. He walked slowly toward Arya, each footstep sounding like the countdown of a bomb. "Daddy will come," Nicholas repeated mockingly. "Oh, I'm sure Luca will come. That's exactly what I want." He stopped in front of Arya and bent down until his face was only centimeters from hers. "You know, my father tried to kill Luca Moretti for 20 years and failed. The ghost was too careful, too unpredictable. But now it's different. Now he has a weakness. 2 weaknesses, actually." He glanced toward Emma in the iron cage, a cruel smile spreading across his lips. "Such a pretty little girl. Looks just like her father." "Don't look at my child," Arya snarled, her eyes blazing with hatred. "Don't you dare touch her. If you lay a single finger on her, I swear I'll kill you." "Whoever you are," Nicholas laughed loudly, the sound bouncing off the empty walls of the warehouse. "You're threatening me? A woman tied up like a pig threatening Nicholas Romano? Do you know what my family does to people who threaten us?" He straightened and walked toward Emma's cage. "Maybe I should show you." "No," Arya screamed, yanking against the ropes until the metal chair shrieked. "Please, do anything to me. Beat me. Kill me. Just don't touch my child. I'm begging you." Nicholas stopped and turned, looking at Arya with amusement. "Begging? Now you know how to beg? Too bad. I don't care about begging." He reached through the bars and grabbed Emma's chin, forcing the child to look at him. Emma screamed, struggling against his rough grip. The sound of her daughter's cries stabbed Arya's heart like 1,000 knives. She screamed and thrashed wildly, the rope slicing into her flesh, but she felt no pain, only terror and a rage that burned through her veins. "That's enough, Nicholas." A voice cut through the chaos as Victor Castellano stepped out of the shadows. "We need them alive to draw Luca here. Don't ruin the plan." Nicholas released Emma. She collapsed into the corner of the cage, sobbing uncontrollably. He shot Victor an irritated look but didn't argue. Instead, he turned back to Arya. "She's yours," he said to Victor. "Do whatever you want. Just keep her conscious. I want Luca to see her when he dies." When Nicholas disappeared back into the darkness, Victor approached Arya. He pulled up a chair and sat in front of her as if settling in for a casual conversation. "You know, Arya," he began calmly, as though recounting something mundane. "I've been watching you for 7 years. Every day, every step, every tear you shed. I know everything." Arya stared at him, her eyes filled with hatred and revulsion. "You're a monster. All the misery you've endured these past 7 years wasn't bad luck, Arya. It was a masterpiece I painted with your blood and tears. Marco thought I was protecting you, but I was the one pulling the strings, ensuring no help ever reached you. I was the ghost in your shadows, orchestrating everything from your father's hatred to your desperate poverty just to keep you broken. I needed you fragile and isolated, so that when the time came, I could use you as the ultimate card to destroy Luca. I only had to keep you miserable long enough, and your own body betrayed you." "Why?" Arya asked, her voice shattering. "Why did you do this?" I never did anything to you. Because you were Luca's weakness, Victor replied evenly. And I needed a weakness to destroy him when the time was right. I kept you broken so you'd never have the strength to threaten my plan. And so when I needed you, you'd be desperate enough not to resist. He stood, looking down at her with icy contempt. But you produced one unexpected variable. That child. He glanced at Emma, still crying inside the cage. Who would have thought a 7-year-old would be brave enough to run into Luca's basement to warn him about a bomb? Without her, Luca would have been dead this morning, and I wouldn't be going through all this trouble. Arya looked at her daughter, her heart torn apart and swelling with pride at the same time. Emma, her small, brave girl, had shattered the enemy's plan, and even now, in the hands of monsters, Arya believed Luca would come. He would find them, he would save them, and he would make every one of these men pay. Pier 23 was swallowed by darkness as Luca's convoy rolled in. 12 black SUVs stopped about 200 meters from the warehouse, engines cut, headlights dark. 60 men stepped out in silence, guns loaded, knives drawn. No one spoke, no one needed to. They all knew they might die tonight, and every one of them was ready. Luca stood before his army, the white bandage on his head soaked red with blood, his steel-gray eyes burning like twin flames. He was no longer the cold, calculating Dawn. He was a father coming for his daughter, and there was no force on this earth that could stop him. 3 strike teams, he ordered sharply. Marco takes Team 1 from the east. Tony takes Team 2 from the west. I go straight through the front. The only objective is getting Arya and Emma out alive. Kill anyone in the way, no mercy. A unified response murmured through the darkness. Then they scattered like ghosts. Marco, his shoulder still screaming from the wound, refused to stay back. He'd fight beside his boss to his last breath. Luca advanced toward the warehouse's main entrance with 20 men behind him. He had no intention of sneaking in. He wanted the Romanos to know death was coming. When they were 30 meters from the door, floodlights inside snapped on, turning night into day, and gunfire erupted. The first bullet skimmed past Luca's face, but he didn't slow. He raised his weapon and returned fire, each shot finding its mark with lethal precision. 1 Romano soldier fell, 2, 3. Around him, his men fought. Gunfire thundered like a storm, screams and groans blending into a symphony of slaughter. Explosions from the east and west told him the other teams had engaged. The warehouse became a battlefield, fire and blood everywhere. Luca pushed inside, every step a bullet, every bullet a life. He didn't think. He didn't hesitate. He was a killing machine carving a path to his child. A man lunged from the shadows with a knife, but Luca was faster. He caught the wrist, twisted, bone cracking before the man could scream, then fired point blank into his head and kept moving. Then he saw Salvatore Romano. The aging patriarch stood in the center of the warehouse, gun in hand, 5 guards around him. 60 years old, hair white as ash, eyes still sharp as blades. The sworn enemy of the Moretti family, the man who'd ordered Luca's father killed 20 years ago. "Luca Moretti," Salvatore roared, hatred dripping from every word. "You finally grew the balls to come here," Luca answered with bullets. The first dropped the guard on Salvatore's right. The second tore through the left guard's shoulder. The third, fourth, and fifth cut down the rest. The final round slammed into Salvatore Romano's chest. The old man staggered, staring at the spreading blood in disbelief. "You can't," he whispered. "The Romano family can't end like this. This is the price for touching my family," Luca said coldly, then fired one more shot into Salvatore's head. The old man collapsed, eyes staring at the warehouse ceiling, dead. Luca didn't pause to savor it. Arya's scream echoed from a back room, and he sprinted toward it like an arrow. He kicked the door open and froze. Emma was in Victor's grip, her hair twisted in his fist, a blade pressed against her throat. Nicholas Romano stood behind Arya, gun to her temple. "Drop the gun, Luca," Nicholas snarled, his face twisted with rage now that his father was dead. "Drop it, or they both die right here." Luca looked at his daughter. Emma's brown eyes were filled with tears, but she didn't cry out. She was trying to be brave for him. Then he looked at Arya, the woman he loved. Her eyes locked on his with nothing but trust and love. "Daddy," Emma said, her voice shaking but clear. "Don't worry about me. Save Mommy." Luca's heart shattered. His 7-year-old child, in the most dangerous moment of her life, was thinking of someone else. He slowly lowered his gun, never taking his eyes off Victor. "Let my daughter go," he said, his voice unnaturally calm. "What do you want? Money, power. I'll give you everything. Just let my child go." Victor laughed. The laugh of a man who thought he'd won. Too late, boss. 15 years I waited for this moment. 15 years bowing my head to you. Now you'll know what it feels like to lose everything. But Victor made one mistake. He focused too much on Luca and forgot Marco. A gunshot cracked from behind, the bullet tearing through Nicholas's shoulder. Nicholas dropped his weapon and crashed backward. Arya spun, slamming her elbow into his face, and Nicholas crumpled to the floor. At the same instant, Emma sank her teeth into Victor's hand, her small jaws clamping down with everything she had. Victor screamed in pain, his grip loosening for a fraction of a second. That fraction was all Luca needed. He lunged like a panther, grabbing Victor by the throat and smashing his head into the floor. Luca fired into Victor's shoulder, then his knee, then his hand. He didn't kill him. Not yet. He wanted the traitor to suffer first. Daddy! Emma ran to him, throwing herself into his arms. Luca crushed her to his chest, feeling her tiny heart pounding against his own. Arya rushed to them, and for the first time in 7 years, their family held each other amid the ruins of war. They held each other amid the stench of gunpowder and blood, amid corpses and shattered wreckage. And yet for Luca, this was the most peaceful moment of his life. His daughter was in his arms. The woman he loved was leaning against his shoulder. And for the first time in 7 years, he felt whole. Around them, the battle was over. Luca's men had won, but not without loss. 8 men had fallen tonight. 8 who would never return to their families. Luca would make sure those families were cared for the rest of their lives. That was his promise. Victor lay groaning on the floor, blood spilling from wounds Luca had deliberately made non-fatal. He would live. He would live to face justice, to rot in prison until death took him. Death would have been too quick, too merciful for a man who had created 7 years of hell for Arya and Emma. Nicholas Romano was handcuffed and dragged away by 2 of Marco's men. He would testify, would confess every crime of the Romano family, and would spend the remainder of his life behind bars beside Victor. The 2 traitors would have endless time to reflect on their choices. The police would arrive soon. Marco came to Luca's side, his voice hoarse with exhaustion, telling him they had to leave. Luca nodded and gently lifted Emma into his arms. She wrapped her arms around his neck, her head resting against his shoulder, her eyes fluttering shut from sheer exhaustion. With one arm holding his daughter, he took Arya's hand with the other. She didn't pull away. She let him lead her out of hell, past bodies and pools of blood, toward the first pale light of dawn on the horizon. An SUV carried them to a new safe house, a small villa in a quiet suburb known to no one. By the time they arrived, the sun was fully risen, painting the sky gold and pouring through wide glass windows. Emma was placed on the softest bed, covered with the warmest blanket, and she fell asleep instantly, a faint smile on her lips as if dreaming something sweet. Arya sat beside her, gently stroking her black hair. The bruises on her wrists had been bandaged, the scratches on her face cleaned, but the pain in her heart had no medicine. She knew the truth now about her 7 years of suffering. Victor had confessed everything, and she didn't know how she was supposed to feel. Luca entered the room and stopped at the doorway as if asking permission. He'd changed into clean clothes, the wound on his head stitched, but worry still lingered in his eyes. He asked softly if she wanted to talk or if she needed rest first. Arya stayed silent for a moment, looking at her sleeping daughter, then stood and stepped onto the veranda, Luca following her. They stood side by side, watching the sunrise illuminate a garden full of flowers, neither speaking for a long while. Arya spoke softly, her voice heavy with the weight of the truth. She told him how Victor's confession had finally cleared the fog of 7 years of self-hatred. She no longer felt like a victim of a cruel fate, but a survivor of a long, dark game that had finally come to an end. Luca closed his eyes as pain and guilt crushed him. He whispered that he was sorry, knowing an apology wasn't enough, knowing nothing could repay what she'd endured, but swearing that from this moment on, he'd spend his life protecting her and Emma, never letting anyone hurt them again. Arya turned to him, her brown eyes no longer filled with the fury of the day before. There was exhaustion there, and pain, but also a fragile glimmer of hope. She said he had come for them, that he'd risked his life and the lives of 60 men to save them, and that it meant something to her. Luca answered that he would always come, even if he had to walk through fire or fight the entire world, because they were his family, the only reason he still wanted to live. Arya studied him for a long moment, searching his steel-gray eyes, and what she found was love, regret, and a broken man trying to gather his shattered pieces. She told him she couldn't promise forgiveness right now, that 7 years of pain couldn't be erased overnight, but she could give him a chance to prove he'd changed, a chance to be the father Emma needed, and the man he once was when they loved each other. Luca felt his heart bloom. That was all he needed. One chance. He swore he wouldn't fail her. Lifting his hand to gently touch her cheek, they stood there, foreheads pressed together, breaths mingling. And for the first time in 7 years, Arya allowed herself to believe in love again. Small footsteps sounded behind them, and they turned to see Emma standing in the doorway, eyes still sleepy but a smile on her lips. She called out softly, asking if they were really a family now. The simple question of a 7-year-old carried a lifetime of longing. Arya looked at Luca. Luca looked at Arya. Then they smiled together and opened their arms to Emma. Arya answered through tears of happiness that yes, they were a real family now. Emma ran into their embrace. The three of them held each other in the golden dawn, tears falling. But this time they were tears of joy, of reunion, of a family that had finally found its way back to one another, after 7 long years lost. 1 week later, afternoon sunlight poured through the hospital window as Arya opened her eyes after an 8-hour heart surgery. The first thing she saw was Luca sitting beside her bed, his hand tightly holding hers, his steel-gray eyes dark with exhaustion from staying awake the entire time. And Emma was curled up asleep on the sofa in the corner of the room, her face peaceful like an angel's. The surgery had been a success. The doctor said Arya would make a full recovery after several months of healing. Luca had paid every medical expense, erased all of her debts, and hired the best medical team to care for her. For the first time in 7 years, Arya didn't have to worry about money or the future. Victor Castellano and Nicholas Romano had been arrested and were awaiting trial. Evidence of their crimes was stacked like a mountain, from conspiracy to commit murder to kidnapping, extortion, and countless other charges. Both men would face life imprisonment, rotting behind bars until their final breath. Justice had finally been served. News of the Romano family's collapse swept through the underworld like a storm. Luca Moretti, the man they called the Ghost, had proven that anyone who dared touch his family would pay the highest price. But more important than all those victories, he had found his family again. 1 month later, after Arya had fully recovered, the family moved into a new house by Lake Michigan. Not a safe house, not a fortress, just a warm home where a family could live in peace. That afternoon, they sat on the porch watching the sun sink below the horizon, painting the lake in shades of red. Emma sat between her father and mother, her head resting on Arya's shoulder, her hand tightly holding Luca's. "Dad," Emma said softly, breaking the tranquil silence. "Will you stay with Mom and me forever?" Luca looked down at his daughter, then at Arya. The woman he loved was smiling at him, her brown eyes shimmering in the sunset. "Forever," he promised, his voice steady as stone. "I won't ever leave you again." Arya squeezed his hand gently, and he understood that she had forgiven him, not with words, but with a small gesture more meaningful than any words could be. They sat there until the sun disappeared completely and the first stars appeared in the sky. 3 people who had once been broken had found one another and become whole. Their story is a testament to the power of love, sacrifice, and the belief that family is everything. No matter who you are, no matter what you've done, no matter how deeply life has pushed you into darkness, with love and courage, you can still find your way home. If this story touched your heart, please press like and share to spread its message to more people. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss more emotional stories every day. What did you think of this story? Have you ever experienced a moment that made you realize family is the most important thing? Please share your thoughts in the comments. We truly want to hear your stories from the bottom of your heart. We wish everyone watching this video good health, a joyful life, and days filled with love. Goodbye, and we'll see you again in the next video.